You're standing at 19,000 feet, the air so thin every breath burns, and in front of you rises a mountain so perfect it looks carved. 4 faces, almost pointing to the 4 directions of the compass. A vertical crack splitting its southern wall from top to bottom, and you suddenly understand why no human foot has ever touched its summit. This is Mount Kailash. And I'm going to tell you something that took me 3 years to believe. The people who know this mountain best, the monks who have circled its base for centuries, insist it is not a mountain at all. They call it hollow. They call it built. And when I first read the words of the Chinese and Tibetan monks who guard it, I laughed because it sounded insane. Then I found the survey numbers, and I stopped laughing. By the end of this, I'm going to show you a set of measurements recorded by a Russian scientific expedition in 2004. Distances so precise they should not exist by accident, and the reason a mountain in the middle of Tibet may be lined up with the North Pole, the South Pole, and a ring of stones in England, this isn't a legend passed around a campfire. It traces back to expedition logs, to surveyor records, and to men who signed their names to what they saw. I remember the exact moment it hooked me. I was in a cheap hotel room in Kathmandu, jet-lagged, flipping through a water-stained travel book someone had left behind, and there was one photograph of Kailash at dusk with a shadow shaped like a spiral falling across its face. I stared at that picture until the sun came up. I couldn't explain why it wouldn't let me sleep, but I knew I had to go find out what it was. So let me take you down the same path I walked. Every dead end. Every number that shouldn't add up but does. Let me start with the thing that anyone can verify, because that's where my own doubt began. Mount Kailash sits in the far west of Tibet, part of a range that branches off the main Himalayas. Its height is listed at 6,638 meters, which is about 21,778 feet. Now, by Himalayan standards, that is not a giant. Everest towers nearly a mile higher. There are dozens of peaks nearby that dwarf it. And that was my first question, the one that kept nagging at me. Why is this smaller mountain the one that 4 separate religions call the center of the world? Because that's the part people skip past. Hindus believe it is the home of Shiva. Buddhists call it Mount Meru, the axis of the entire universe. The Jain faith says it's where their first spiritual teacher reached liberation. And the ancient Bon religion of Tibet, older than all of them, places the soul of the world right there on its slopes. 4 traditions, spanning thousands of years, thousands of miles apart, all pointing at the same rock and saying the same thing. This is the center. I told myself that was just coincidence. Sacred mountains are common. Every culture has one. That's what I wanted to believe, because the alternative was uncomfortable. But then I looked at what flows down off of Kailash, and the coincidence started to feel a lot heavier. Because from the base of this single mountain, 4 of the greatest rivers in Asia begin. The Indus flows to the north. The Brahmaputra, which the Tibetans call the Yarlung Tsangpo, flows to the east. The Sutlej flows to the west. And the Karnali, which feeds the mighty Ganges, flows to the south. 4 rivers, 4 directions, all born from the meltwater of one peak. These rivers water almost 2 billion people today. Nearly a quarter of everyone alive drinks from water that started at the foot of Kailash. Now, sit with that for a second the way I had to. The ancient people who called this the center of the world had no satellites. They had no way to map a river's entire course across a continent. And yet they chose, out of every mountain in the highest range on Earth, the exact one that sends water out in all 4 cardinal directions to feed half of humanity. Either that is the luckiest guess in the history of religion, or those people knew something about that mountain that we've forgotten. That question is what pushed me from a curious tourist into an obsessive. And the deeper I dug, the stranger the shape of the mountain itself became. Because here's what I found next, and it's the detail that made me start filling notebooks. Mount Kailash has 4 faces, and those faces are roughly aligned with the 4 points of the compass: north, south, east, west. From the air, its base is close to a square. Its sides rise up like walls, far steeper and more regular than the jagged, chaotic peaks all around it. It doesn't look eroded and random the way mountains are supposed to. It looks, and I hesitate even to say this out loud, like it was shaped. I fought this idea hard. I am not the kind of person who wants a mountain to be artificial. My whole instinct was to find the geologist who would explain it away. So I went looking for the boring answer, and I want to walk you through exactly what I found, because that search is where things got interesting. Standard geology says Kailash is made of conglomerate rock, layers of sediment compressed, and then thrust upward when the Indian plate crashed into Asia. That's real. That collision built the whole Himalayan range over tens of millions of years. And on paper, that explains a mountain. It does not, and this is where I got stuck, explain a mountain with 4 flat faces oriented to the compass, with a base that reads like a square, standing alone and symmetrical while every peak around it is a broken mess of ridges. I kept waiting for the expert quote that would settle it. I never found a clean one. What I found instead were the pilgrims. For at least 1,000 years, people have walked a circle around the base of Kailash. They call it the Kora. It's a path of about 52 kilometers, roughly 32 miles, and the devout complete the entire loop in a single day, hiking across a high mountain pass over 18,000 feet. Hindus and Buddhists walk it clockwise. The Bon walk it counterclockwise. And here's the belief that stopped me cold when I first read it. They say that completing 108 loops around the mountain guarantees the release of the soul. That number, 108, is sacred across the entire region, and it kept appearing over and over as I dug into the measurements of the mountain itself. Now here's where I have to be honest with you about the moment the story turned dark, because up until this point, I was just chasing wonder. This was still a beautiful mystery. And then I realized nobody has ever climbed it. Not once. In an age when thousands of people have stood on top of Everest, when climbers have summited every major peak on this planet, this one modest mountain, only 21,000 feet, has never been conquered. And it's not for lack of trying to get permission. That's the fact that turned my curiosity into something closer to unease. Because when I asked why, the answers I got did not sit right with me at all. The official reason is respect. The mountain is holy, so out of reverence, climbing is forbidden. And I accepted that at first. It's a decent answer. But then I found the case of Reinhold Messner, arguably the greatest mountaineer who has ever lived, the first man to climb Everest without bottled oxygen. In the 1980s, the Chinese authorities reportedly offered Messner a permit to climb Kailash. He turned it down. And the reasons he gave were not only about religion, he spoke about the spiritual weight of the place, about how some things should be left untouched. Then came 2001, and this is the part that made me lean in. A Spanish team actually secured permission from the Chinese government to climb Kailash. They had the papers, they had the gear, and the backlash was so enormous from the Dalai Lama, from millions of believers around the world, that the expedition was called off before a single climber set foot on the slope. The permission was quietly withdrawn, and the mountain stayed exactly as it has always been, untouched. I want you to notice something in that story because I couldn't stop noticing it. Every time someone gets close to actually going up there and looking, something stops them. Reverence, protest, withdrawn permits. The result is always the same. No one is allowed to examine the summit. And the higher I climbed into this research, the more I felt like the ban wasn't only about protecting the mountain from us. It felt like it was about protecting something up there from being seen. That's when I found the Russians. And that is when this stopped being a story about a mountain and became the story that consumed a year of my life. In 2004, a scientific expedition led by a Russian surgeon and researcher named Ernst Muldashev traveled to the Kailash region. Muldashev was not some backpacker with a theory. He was a well-known eye surgeon, the head of an entire center for eye and plastic surgery in Russia, a man with real scientific credentials and a career to protect. He assembled a team of scientists, geologists, historians, and they went to Kailash specifically to measure it, to treat it as a structure, to find out whether the whispers the monks had passed down for centuries could be tested with instruments. What they came back and reported broke something open in me. Muldashev's team concluded that Kailash was not a natural mountain. They called it the center of a vast complex, a system of stone structures, mirrors, and pyramids arranged around the main peak. They claimed the mountain itself was a colossal pyramid, hollow, built or shaped by an intelligence, and surrounded by more than 100 smaller structures. And before you do what I did, before you roll your eyes and reach for the word crackpot, let me give you the numbers. Because the numbers are why I couldn't walk away. Muldashev and others who studied the geodesy of Kailash reported a set of distances. And these are the measurements that I checked myself, over and over, waiting for them to fall apart. The distance from Mount Kailash to the North Pole, roughly 6,666 kilometers. The distance from Mount Kailash to Stonehenge, that ancient ring of stones in England, also roughly 6,666 kilometers, and the distance from Kailash to the South Pole, roughly 13,332 kilometers. Exactly double. Before I take you down into the strangest part of this, the part with the Russians, let me stop for one honest moment, because what happened to me next is exactly why I put everything I learned into writing. You're the one who feels it right now, aren't you? That itch in the back of your mind, the sense that the official story about this mountain, the one that says it's just holy rock we leave alone out of politeness, was scrubbed clean of the evidence that actually matters. I lived with that itch for 3 years, so I gathered the whole thing into a set of digital books called The Lost Origins Complete Library. 3 volumes you can read tonight on any phone, tablet, or computer. No special app needed. The first volume, First Threshold, walks you through where the map runs out and the evidence begins, including the ship in the mountain, the anatomy of a real archaeological controversy that rhymes with everything you've heard here. The second, Deep Signal, hands you the grammar of evidence, how to read a contested finding like the Kailash distances without being fooled by either the believers or the debunkers. And the third, Hidden Systems, the complete casebook you can't get anywhere else, ties archaeology, ecology, and every strange site into one unified method. Here's the free test you can run before you ever spend a dime. Tonight, open a map tool and measure the Great Circle distance from Kailash to Stonehenge yourself. Then nudge your starting point a few kilometers and watch how much that famous 6,666 wobbles. That single 10-minute check teaches you more about reading contested claims than a year of arguing online. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. And because these are evidence-based volumes, not a fad, the questions in them don't go stale. That missing evidence is still missing tonight, still waiting for someone patient enough to weigh it. Now, with all of that in your hands, let me finally take you to the Russians, because that is where this stopped being a story about a mountain. I sat there staring at those figures the same way I'd stared at that photograph in Kathmandu. 6,666. The same repeating number that echoes the sacred 108 of the pilgrims, the same haunting symmetry, pointing from a mountain in Tibet to the top of the world, to the bottom of the world, and to a Stone Age monument on an island half a planet away. Now I have to stop here and do the honest thing, because I know exactly who you are. You're the person who distrusts a story that's too clean. So am I. That's the whole reason you're still here. And this next part is the part that nearly made me shut the notebook for good, so I need to walk you through it the way I lived it, doubt and all, because the skeptic in me lit up like an alarm. And the skeptic had good points. Let me give them to you straight, the same arguments I used on myself for weeks. First, those distances. When you measure across the curved surface of the Earth, over thousands of kilometers, you can make the numbers land almost anywhere depending on where exactly you start and stop. Kailash is a big massif. Stonehenge is a wide site. Push your starting point a few kilometers one way, and the neat 6,666 starts to wobble. The critics said this was cherry picking, choosing the endpoints that gave you the mystical answer and ignoring the ones that didn't. And I had to admit, that's a fair hit. That one landed. Second, the pyramid claim. Conglomerate rock, the stuff Kailash is made of, actually can form surprisingly flat faces and sharp angles when it fractures and weathers along its bedding planes. Geologists will tell you that steep, wall-like faces are not proof of construction. Nature builds pyramids too. There are natural mountains all over the world that look eerily engineered, so a four-sided peak, on its own, proves nothing. And third, Muldashev himself. His work has been heavily criticized in the scientific community. His books talk about ancient races and psychic energy and things no geologist would sign off on. So the easy move, the comfortable move, was to file the whole thing under fantasy and go home, and I almost did. I genuinely almost did. For about 2 weeks, I was convinced I'd been chasing a beautiful nothing. But here's the exact point where my doubt cracked, and I need you to follow this closely, because it's the hinge of everything. I realized I was doing something dishonest. I was so eager to dismiss the wild claim that I was using the wild claim to bury the ordinary facts underneath it. And the ordinary facts were the part that wouldn't die. Forget the pyramid for a second. Forget Muldashev's psychic energy. Strip all of that away, and you are still left with a mountain that 4 ancient religions independently identified as the exact center of the world. You are still left with 4 continental rivers pouring out of it in 4 cardinal directions to water a quarter of the human race. You are still left with 4 faces aligned to the compass. And you are still left with the single most inexplicable fact of all, the one that has nothing to do with any Russian's theory. No one has ever climbed it. Every other great peak has fallen. This one has not. The skeptics had explained away Muldashev. They had not explained away the mountain, and once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. So I went back to the monks. And that is where the real secret was waiting. Hidden, not in a Russian's measurements, but in what the people who live beside that mountain have been quietly saying for generations. Because Muldashev's team reported something else from their expedition, and this is the detail that other videos leave out, the one that kept me awake. The local monks warned them about time. They said that near the mountain, on the sacred slopes, time does not behave the way it should, and Muldashev's group claimed to experience it directly. Members of the expedition reported that after spending a period of hours in a valley near the peak, their fingernails and their hair had grown as if 2 weeks had passed. Their bodies had aged faster than the clock said they should have. 12 hours, they claimed, had done the work of a fortnight. Now, I know how that sounds. I know, but listen to how it lines up with the belief the monks already held, long before any Russian showed up with a measuring tape. The Tibetan and Chinese Buddhist tradition around Kailash holds that the mountain is a place where the ordinary rules bend. They speak of it as an axis, a pole around which reality itself turns. And there are accounts, passed down among the monks who keep the region, of pilgrims who ventured too far up the forbidden slopes and came back changed, or came back old, or did not come back at all. The mountain, they say, is alive. It measures you, and it decides. I found records of these warnings appearing again and again in the accounts of the people who actually went, and here is what finally broke my resistance completely. The monks were not describing the same thing as the tourists. The tourists came back with legends. The monks came back with rules. Specific ones: don't climb, don't step there. Walk the circle, never the summit. Complete the loop clockwise, or if you follow the old Bon way, counterclockwise, but never ever go up. Those aren't the vague superstitions of people who are guessing. Those are the careful instructions of people who have learned over a very long time exactly what the mountain does and how not to trigger it. And that reframed the entire ban for me. The reason no one climbs Kailash may not be only reverence. It may be knowledge. The kind of hard-won knowledge that becomes a religious law precisely because breaking it is dangerous. We looked at the prohibition and called it faith. What if it was a warning we simply stopped understanding? So now, let me bring you all the way down to the bottom of the rabbit hole, to the thing that ended my journey and that I have never been able to explain away. This is the piece I promised you at the start. When I finally laid all of it side by side, the Muldashev expedition of 2004, the geodesic distances, the monk testimony about time, and the ancient beliefs, a single pattern emerged that no ordinary explanation could cover, and it centered on one number: 108. That number is not random, and it is not only religious. Here's what I found, and it's the fact that ends the story. The average distance from the Earth to the Sun is very close to 108 times the diameter of the Sunday. The average distance from the Earth to the Moon is very close to 108 times the diameter of the Moon. It is a number written into the geometry of our sky, the ratio that connects our planet to the two great bodies that rule it. And the ancient people of Kailash, who supposedly knew none of this, built their entire sacred practice around it. 108 loops to free the soul, 108 beads on the prayer strings they carry as they walk. The same cosmic number, encoded in the ritual of a mountain that they also happen to place at the precise center of the world, feeding 4 rivers in 4 directions, aligned to 4 faces, at a distance from the poles that mirrors itself in that endless repeating 6. That was the moment the whole thing closed around me like a fist. Because you cannot explain all of it at once with coincidence. You can explain any single piece. The rivers, maybe luck. The faces, maybe geology. The distances, maybe loose measurement. The number, maybe a happy accident. But the ancient people who chose this mountain didn't get one of those things right. They got all of them right at a time when they should have had no way of knowing any of it. They pointed at the one peak that was the geographic heart of the continent, that carried a cosmic ratio in its rituals, that sent water to half the species. And they said, this is the center. This is the axis. Do not climb it. And then they were proven correct, detail after detail, thousands of years later by satellites and surgeons and survey instruments. The Chinese and Tibetan monks never needed our instruments. That's the secret that Muldashev's expedition really uncovered in 2004. Buried under all the noise about pyramids and psychic mirrors, the monks weren't guarding a superstition. They were guarding a memory of what that mountain is, and what it does to time, and why the summit must never be touched, passed hand to hand, generation to generation, in a language of ritual we mistook for myth. They preserved the answer while the rest of the world forgot the question. And when a team of scientists finally went up there with modern tools and started measuring, they didn't discover the mystery. They simply confirmed what the monks had been telling anyone who would listen for 1,000 years. I went looking for a mountain. What I found was a warning that has been kept faithfully since before recorded history by the only people who never stopped believing it. So here's what I'm left with and what I'm handing to you now. Every great peak on this planet has been conquered, measured, mapped, and stripped of its secrets, except one. And the one we left alone is the one the ancients swore was the center of everything. Maybe we didn't leave it alone out of politeness. Maybe, somewhere deep down, we knew better. If you're still here with me, it's because you're the kind of person who feels the itch when the official answer is too smooth, who would rather sit with a real question than swallow a comfortable lie. That's who I made this for. So I want to hear from you. The distances to the North Pole and to Stonehenge, that repeating 6,666, and the way 108 is hidden in the sky above us. Do you think that's coincidence, stacked on coincidence? Or do you think those ancient people knew something we're only now catching up to? Tell me in the comments. And tell me where in the world you're watching from, because I read every single one. If this pulled you in the way it pulled me in, then come with me. Subscribe and stand with the people who keep chasing the cases everyone else was told to close. Because the next mountain I've been digging into hides something even stranger. There's a second peak, in another range entirely, where the compasses spin, the instruments fail, and the local people tell the very same story about time that the monks of Kailash have been telling all along. And I think the two places are connected. I just have to prove it. Stay with me, and we'll find out together. Before you go, this video gave you the overview, but there's more. Inside my membership, the Unexplained Society, I pick up right where I just stopped. You can ask me your own questions, and I answer you myself, no robots. Mystery lovers like you are already here with me. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, and you can cancel anytime with one click. Come join me. Now, if this stirred something in you, wait until you hear what an old Ethiopian monk whispered about Christ in his final moments. Those words were never meant to be found. That next story is starting right here.